Imagine being banned from using your own tractor, then watching the same people who ban you beg for help when disaster strikes. That's exactly what happened to me when my HOA's ridiculous rules came back to bite them hard. And let me tell you, it was glorious. I've lived in my neighborhood for over a decade, and it was supposed to be the perfect blend of rural charm and suburban conveniencia place, where people could enjoy spacious lots, a tight-knit community, and a little bit of country living. That's why I had my tractor. It wasn't just for show, it was an essential tool. In the winter, I used it to clear my driveway and help my neighbors do the same. In the summer, it kept my property in shape. And let's be real, who doesn't love having a powerful machine that makes life easier? But as with most suburban paradises, there was a catch: the HOA. The Homeowners Association was supposed to keep the community looking nice, but over the years, it had morphed into something else entirely: a power-hungry group run by people who had nothing better to do than micromanage their neighbors. And at the top of it all was Patricia. Yes, that was her real name. And yes, she lived up to every single expectation you might have. Patricia had been HOA president for 3 years, and in that time, she made it her personal mission to enforce pointless rules that only seemed to benefit her idea of a perfect neighborhood. You couldn't have a shed unless it matched your house's trim color. You couldn't leave your trash cans out for more than 2 hours after pickup. And don't even get me started on the Christmas decorations ban. But the one rule that really made my blood boil, the no heavy machinery rule. It started with a letter: "Dear homeowner, per HOA guidelines, all heavy machinery, including tractors, is prohibited from being stored on residential property." I thought it was a joke. My tractor had been parked in my driveway for years without issue. I used it responsibly. I wasn't tearing up the roads or running it at odd hours, and yet, somehow, Patricia and her cronies decided that my completely legal, useful, and non-intrusive tractor was a problem. I attended the next HOA meeting fully expecting to resolve the situation with a little common sense. That was my first mistake. The meeting was held in the neighborhood clubhouse, a place that was supposed to be for community events, but was mostly used for HOA power trips. I sat in the back, arms crossed, waiting for my turn. Patricia, dressed in her usual blazer and fake smile, called the meeting to order. Trevor, the HOA vice president and Patricia's loyal lapdog, sat beside her nodding along like he had no thoughts of his own. When my turn came, I kept it simple. I explained that my tractor wasn't an eyesore, it wasn't a hazard, and more importantly, it was necessary for snow removal. Without it, my driveway and several of my neighbors would become completely inaccessible during winter storms. Patricia smiled in that condescending way that made my blood pressure spike. "I understand your concerns," she said, which was HOA speak for "I don't care, but the board has decided that heavy machinery, including tractors, does not align with the aesthetic of our community. We have a snow plow service for the roads, so private equipment is unnecessary." And necessary? Tell that to the elderly couple down the street who relied on me to clear their driveway every year. Tell that to the single mom who wouldn't be able to get her car out after a major snowfall. But Patricia didn't care about practicality, she cared about rules. I pointed out that my tractor was already here and had been 4 years without issue. But Trevor, ever the echo, chimed in, "The rule is the rule. If we make exceptions, then everyone will want to bend the guidelines." So that was it. The HOA voted. My tractor was banned. I had 30 days to remove it, or I'd be fined $100 per week. If I refused to comply, they could escalate the fines and eventually slap a lien on my property. I had no choice. I fought it as much as I could, but in the end, I had to give in. A friend of mine had a barn outside town where I could store it. With a heavy heart, I drove my tractor away, knowing full well that this was going to cause way more problems than it solved. Winter came fast that year, but at first, it was milled a few flurries here and there, nothing major. The HOA was smug, acting like they'd made the right decision. Then, in early January, the weather report started to change. Meteorologists warned that a historic blizzard was on the way. We weren't talking about a few inches. We were talking about multiple feet of snow, high winds, and dangerously low temperatures. A storm like this wasn't just inconvenient, it was paralyzing. Despite the warnings, the HOA remained confident that their tiny plow service would be enough. After all, they had paid good money for it. They sent out an email reminding residents that personal snow clearing equipment was unnecessary, and that they should be patient. But the storm didn't care about HOA policies. When it hit hard. Within hours, the roads disappeared under feet of snow. Power lines snapped under the weight of ice. The entire town was thrown into chaos. By the next morning, everything was frozen solid. People were trapped inside their homes, cars were buried, and that plow service the HOA was so proud of was nowhere to be found. Panic set in. People realized they had no way to get out. Neighbors started calling each other trying to figure out a solution. Some tried shoveling their driveways, but the snow was too deep. The HOA's plan of waiting it out quickly collapsed. Then the calls started coming in. I sat in my living room sipping coffee, warm and comfortable, when I heard the first knock. I opened the door to see Trevor standing there, bundled up like a kid going on his first snow day. His face was tight with barely contained embarrassment. "Hey," he said, clearing his throat. We could use some help." I raised an eyebrow. "Help with what?" Trevor shuffled his feet, his pride visibly crumbling. "The roads, the driveways. Patricia's house is completely snowed in. The plows aren't coming. He sighed, finally spitting it out. "We need your tractor." I took a long sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. "You mean the tractor the HOA banned?" Trevor winced. "Yeah, that one." I leaned against the door frame, letting him stew in his own words. I wasn't going to let them off the hook that easily, not after what they'd done. "Oh, I'd love to help," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "But you see, my tractor isn't stored here anymore. HOA rules and all. But hey, good luck with that storm." And with that, I shut the door in his face. This was going to be fun. Trevor's face had been priceless. When I shut the door on him, he stood there for a moment, probably expecting me to crack, and offered to help. When I didn't, he trudged back through knee-deep snow, slipping twice on his way down my driveway. I watched him struggle, sipping my coffee with a smirk. The HOA had made their bed. Now they could lie in it under 3 feet of snow. I knew it wouldn't be the last time I heard from them. The storm had only just begun. By noon, the entire neighborhood was completely buried. The snow wasn't just falling, it was piling. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling windows and creating monstrous snowdrifts that swallowed everything in sight: cars, mailboxes, even some of the shorter fences. The town power grid, which had always been about as reliable as a politician's promise, finally gave up. One by one, houses went dark. At first, I didn't mind. My generator kicked in automatically, humming to life and keeping everything running. I had food, heat, and, most importantly, the satisfaction of knowing that I'd warned these people. The first sign of real trouble came when I checked my phone. The neighborhood group chat was on fire. "Trevor HOA Vice President, does anyone have updates on when the plows will be here? Roads are still completely covered. Darling HOA Enforcer, my driveway is blocked. I can't even get my front door open. Who do we call? Random Neighbor 1. I tried to shovel, but it's too deep. Can't open my garage door either. Random Neighbor 2. Anyone else lost power? Our heater isn't working. It's freezing in here." Then, the best message of all. "Patricia HOA President, the snowplow company just emailed me. They're overwhelmed and won't be able to reach our neighborhood for at least 3 days. Please remain calm." I nearly dropped my phone from laughing. 3 days? Oh, this was going to be good. I peeked outside again. The street looked like something out of a post-apocalyptic movie, just walls of snow. No visible pavement, no tire tracks. Cars were stuck where they'd been left, their owners either too late or too arrogant to move them before the storm hit full force. Now, I should clarify, I don't enjoy seeing my neighbors suffer. Most of them are good people, just victims of Patricia's delusions of power. But the HOA board? They deserved every bit of this. As night fell, things got worse. The temperature plummeted into the single digits, and without power, a lot of homes had no way to stay warm. People started to panic. The same folks who had smugly supported the tractor ban were now realizing how much they had screwed themselves. That's when the desperate knocks on my door started. The first was my next-door neighbor, an elderly man named Floyd. He had never been a fan of the HOAS nonsense, but he had kept his head down to avoid trouble. Now, his heater was out and his wife was wrapped in 3 blankets shivering. "Do you still have power?" he asked, his breath visible in the freezing air. I nodded. "Generator. Do you mind if we sit inside for a while just to warm up?" Now this was different. Floyd wasn't part of the problem. I immediately let them in, offering them coffee and a seat by the fireplace. As they thawed out, I heard another knock, then another. Within an hour, I had 4 families camped in my living room. Meanwhile, the HOA board members, who lived in their massive, over-decorated homes, were to Prifl to ask for help. Patricia was still sending out emails insisting that everything is under control, even as people in the chat begged for solutions. Then came the breaking point. Sometime after midnight, I was sitting in my kitchen scrolling through messages when my phone rang. I raised an eyebrow no one called anymore. When I saw the name on the screen, I nearly choked on my sea coffee. Patricia. Oh, this was too good. I let it ring a few times before answering. "Hello." There was silence on the other end, then a forced cough. "We need to talk." I grinned. "About what?" "The roads," she said, through gritted teeth, "and your equipment." "Oh," I said, dragging it out. "You mean my tractor one the HOA said was unnecessary?" More silence. Then she exhaled sharply. "Look, I don't have time for this. The plows aren't coming. We need to clear the roads so that emergency services can get through. People are trapped." "Sounds rough." Another pause. "Are you going to help or not?" I leaned back in my chair, enjoying every second. "Well, see, I would help, but you made it clear that my tractor was a violation of HOA policy. I wouldn't want to break the rules." Her voice rose an octave. "Are you seriously going to let people suffer just to prove a point?" "Oh, no," I said. "I definitely want to help. I just think we need to settle a few things first." Patricia hesitated. "What things?" I smiled. "First, I want the tractor ban lifted immediately, in writing." There was a long, heavy silence. I could practically hear her chewing on her own pride. "Fine," I continued. "I want a public apology at the next HOA meeting. You and the board will admit that you were wrong." "Are you kidding me?" I stayed quiet. She grumbled something under her breath, then exhaled. "Fine." I wasn't done. "And I want the fines refunded, every single dollar." Her voice was tight with barely contained rage. "Fine. Just get over here and clear the damn roads." I stood up, stretching. "See, that wasn't so hard, was it?" Before she could explode, I hung up. The next morning, I trudged through the snow to get my tractor back from my friend's barn. When I rolled up to the neighborhood, people actually cheered. The same people who had ignored me before, the ones who had voted with the hallway, now treating me like a hero. I took my time. I made a big show of revving the engine, slowly plowing through the snow banks, clearing driveways one by one. Patricia's house? Oh, I saved that for last. As I worked, I made sure to wave at her every time I passed her window. She looked like she wanted to murder me, but hey, rules are rules. And I was just following their rules after all. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the neighborhood was a frozen wasteland. The storm had dumped nearly 3 feet of snow overnight, turning driveways into impassable trenches and cars into snow-covered tombs. A thick layer of ice coated everything, and the wind had sculpted drifts as tall as fences. The temperature had dropped to nearly zero, and without power, most houses had become unlivable ice boxes. Inside my house, everything was fine. My generator hummed quietly, keeping the lights on and the heat running. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, feeling well rested after a good night's sleep. But outside, it was absolute chaos. People were beginning to realize just how unprepared they were. The HOA's so-called solution of waiting for the plows had completely backfired. There were no plows coming in today, not tomorrow, not anytime soon. The town was in a state of emergency, and our little neighborhood wasn't a priority. We were at the bottom of the list, left to fend for ourselves. I scrolled through the neighborhood group chat, which had now transformed into a desperate plea. Trevor HOA VP, does anyone have updates on when the plows will be here? Roads are still completely covered. Darling HOA enforcer, my driveway is blocked. I can't even get my front door open. Who do we call? Random neighbor 1. I tried to shovel, but it's too deep. Can't open my garage door either. Random neighbor 2. Anyone else lost power? Our heater isn't working. It's freezing in here. Then, the best message of all. Patricia HOA president, if anyone has a way to clear the roads, please step up. The HOA is looking for volunteers. Oh, now they wanted help? I stared at the message for a second, debating how petty I wanted to be. I could go out right now and start clearing everything, be the bigger person, and save the day. Or I could let them stew for a little longer, let the full weight of their mistake sink in. After all, these were the same people who had smugly banned my tractor, the same ones who had handed out fines like candy. I set my phone down and poured myself another cup of coffee. An hour later, another knock came at my door. I wasn't surprised to see Trevor standing there, got his face red from the cold. His usual smug demeanor was completely gone. Listen, he said, shivering, this is getting serious. Some people don't have heat, and others are running out of food. We need the roads cleared. We need you. I leaned against the door frame. Oh, I thought personal snow clearing equipment was against HOA policy. Trevor clenched his jaw. Patricia said she'll reverse the rule. Just help us, man. I pretended to think about it. I'm going to need that in writing. Trevor blinked. You're joking. I raised an eyebrow. Do I look like I'm joking? Without another word, he turned and trudged back through the snow, slipping on a patch of ice as he left. A few minutes later, my phone dinged with a new email from the HOA board. It was short and to the point, effective immediately. The restriction on personal heavy machinery for snow removal is lifted. I chuckled. That was the fastest policy reversal in HOA history. Now that I had what I wanted, it was time to get to work. I grabbed my gear, layered up, and hopped in my truck, heading out to retrieve my tractor from my friend's barn. The drive was slow and treacherous, but once I finally made it there and started up the tractor, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. When I returned to the neighborhood, people were already outside, eagerly watching as I rolled in. Some waved, others actually cheered. It was hilarious. These were the same people who had supported the HOA's dumb rule just weeks ago. Now they were acting like I was a hero. I made a big show of it, revving the engine dramatically before pushing the first wall of snow out of the way. The tractor roared to life, cutting through the drifts like butter. Slowly but surely, I started clearing the roads, carving paths between houses, uncovering driveways, and freeing trapped cars. But there was one house I didn't clear, Patricia's. I passed by it several times, always slowing down just enough for her to see me. She was standing by the window, arms crossed, lips pressed into a tight line. Her driveway was completely buried, and she wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. Some of the other neighbors noticed what I was doing. One even came up to me and whispered, "Dude, you're not going to clear hers?" I smirked. Not yet. I kept working, plowing through street after street. By mid-afternoon, most of the neighborhood was accessible again. People started emerging from their houses, helping each other dig out trenches and walkways. The mood had shifted. It was less of a crisis now and more of a community effort. Then, finally, I made my way toward Patricia's house. I took my time, slowly clearing a path to her driveway, deliberately making her wait. When I finally reached the front, she stepped outside, bundled in layers, her face a mask of forced politeness. "Thank you for helping," she said stiffly. I turned off the engine and climbed down. "Oh, I'm just following HOA policy." Her eye twitched. "We really do appreciate it." I folded my arms. "I'll clear your driveway, but first I want a public apology." Patricia's face flushed. "Excuse me? You heard me," I said, loud enough for the other neighbors to hear. "You forced me to remove my tractor, fined me for having it, and now you want my help? I'll do it, but you need to admit right here, right now, that you were wrong." A few people gasped, others smirked, clearly enjoying the show. Patricia's face twisted like she had swallowed a lemon. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she muttered, "Fine. You were right. The rule was misguided." I cupped a hand to my ear. "Sorry, what was that? I didn't hear you." She glared at me, her jaw clenched. I said, "You were right. The HOA was wrong. The tractor ban was a mistake." I let the moment hang in the air before nodding. "See? That wasn't so hard, with that." I climbed back onto my tractor and cleared her driveway in a matter of minutes. As I finished up, I noticed something beautiful. Neighbors were shaking their heads, talking amongst themselves as the tides were turning. The HOA had lost its grip. This was just the beginning. The moment Patricia choked out that apology, I knew I had won. She had spent years lording over this neighborhood, enforcing pointless rules, and making life miserable for anyone who dared question her authority. But now she was at my mercy, and nothing in her title, not the HOA's so-called power, not even her pre-could save her from the fact that she needed me. But I wasn't done. Clearing her driveway was just the start. The real revenge was going to be delicious. After finishing her driveway, I parked the tractor right in the middle of the street, leaned back in my seat, and stretched, making a big show of taking my time. A few neighbors had gathered around, watching the scene unfold like it was the best entertainment they'd had in years. Patricia stood on her porch, arms crossed, still scowling. "Are you just going to sit there?" I smirked. "Yep." Her nostrils flared. "Why?" I pulled out my phone and checked the time. "Oh, I'm just waiting for what?" I grinned. "For you to send an email to the entire neighborhood, officially reversing the tractor ban publicly." Her face turned red. I said the rule was lifted. "Yeah, but that was just to me," I said. "I want everyone to see it." She looked like she wanted to argue, but she was trapped. If she refused, I could just leave, and she'd be snowed in again. If she sent the email, she'd be admitting to everyone that she had been wrong. I could see the internal battle playing out in her head, but in the end, the choice wasn't really hers. She stomped inside, and a few minutes later, my phone dinged with a new email notification. "Patricia HOA President, dear neighbors, due to unforeseen circumstances, the HOA is officially rescinding the restriction on personal heavy machinery for snow removal. We recognize the importance of community support during extreme weather conditions and appreciate everyone's cooperation." I let out a short laugh. Unforeseen circumstances, that was a fancy way of saying we screwed up and need to cover our butts. I turned to the neighbors, watching the spectacle unfold. "Well, folks, looks like we're officially allowed to own tractors again." A few people clapped. Someone actually cheered. Patricia stepped back onto her porch, glaring at me. "Happy now?" I pretended to think about it, tapping my chin. "Almost." Her shoulders slumped. "What now?" "I want my fines refunded," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, every single dollar. There was a collective ooh from the neighbors. They loved this. Patricia, however, looked like she was about to burst into flames. "If it's not up to me, that's the board." I held up my phone. "You're the HOA president, and as president, you can authorize refunds." She opened her mouth, then closed it, looking around as if searching for backup. But Trevor and Darlene, her usual enforcers, weren't anywhere to be seen. They had abandoned ship the moment things got bad. Finally, she sighed. "Fine." I refreshed my email. A few minutes later, another message arrived from the HOA treasurer. "Your previous fines have been rescinded. A refund will be processed in the next billing cycle." I grinned. "See? That wasn't so hard." Patricia looked like she wanted to launch herself at me, but she was too frozen both literally and figuratively. I gave her a mock salute, revved the tractor one last time, and cleared the last of the snow from her walkway. As I was finishing up, a few neighbors approached me. "You know," said Ani, a guy named Brad who had mostly stayed out of HOA drama, "we should probably talk about getting her out of office." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, she's been running this place like her personal kingdom for years," another neighbor chimed in. "I think it's time for a change." It was music to my ears. Over the next few days, as I continued helping dig people out, I noticed a shift. People who had been too afraid to speak up before were suddenly voicing their frustrations. They were done with Patricia's reign of terror. A petition started circulating on to remove her as HOA president, and the best part, I didn't even have to start it. The petition spread like wildfire. One by one, signatures poured in. It wasn't just about the tractor ban anymore. It was about years of unnecessary fines, ridiculous rules, and over-the-top enforcement. People were angry. Patricia tried to do damage control. She sent out emails insisting that she had always acted in the best interest of the community. She even went door to door trying to sway people. It didn't work. By the end of the week, the petition had more than enough signatures to trigger a recall vote. At the emergency HOA meeting, it was standing room only. Patricia sat at the front, arms crossed, trying to maintain what little power she had left. When it came time for the vote, the results were overwhelming. 81% voted to remove her. She was done. When the decision was announced, she stood up shaking her head in disbelief. "This is a mistake," she muttered. "No," someone called from the back. "The mistake was thinking we'd put up with you forever." People actually applauded as she stormed out. The new HOA board was elected that same night, and the first thing they did, roll back half the ridiculous rules Patricia had put in place. The best part? The neighborhood decided we needed an emergency response plan for future storms. And guess what piece of equipment they voted to purchase for the HOA? A brand new tractor. When they asked if I wanted to be the one to operate it, I just smiled and said, "Oh, I'd love to as long as it doesn't violate HOA policy." Everyone laughed. Patricia, by the way, she put her house up for sale the next month. She couldn't handle living in a neighborhood where she wasn't in control. I made sure to plow an extra-large snowbank in front of her for sale sign before she left, just for old time's sake. The moment Patricia stormed out of that HOA meeting, a weight seemed to lift from the entire neighborhood. People who had been afraid to speak up before were suddenly laughing, shaking hands, and exchanging stories about how much of a nightmare she had been. It wasn't just about me and my tractor anymore. Patricia's fall was a victory for the entire community. But while the HOA drama had taken center stage, the reality was that the storm had left serious damage in its wake. Even with the roads partially cleared, the neighborhood was still struggling. The snow was relentless. The storm had moved on, but the aftermath was brutal. Temperatures were still dangerously low, and many homes were without power. Elderly residents were stuck in freezing houses, families were rationing food, and a few unlucky folks had burst pipes, turning their basements into frozen swimming pools. That's when I realized clearing the roads wasn't enough. If we were going to survive this storm together, we needed more than just plowed street. We needed a full-scale rescue operation. I pulled my tractor back into my driveway and sent a message in the neighborhood group chat. "All right, folks, the roads are clear, but we've still got a lot of people in trouble. If you have power, heat, or extra supplies, reply. Let's start helping our neighbors. Who needs assistance?" Within minutes, messages flooded in. "My grandmother's stuck in her house, and she's running low on medicine. I've got food, but no heat. Can anyone take my family in? We lost power, and my dad's oxygen machine isn't working. We need to get him somewhere safe." I wasn't the only one stepping up. Brad, the guy who had helped start the petition against Patricia, offered his home as a temporary warming shelter. A couple of other neighbors volunteered their houses too. People with four-wheel drive vehicles started carpooling, picking up stranded residents and bringing them to warm houses. It was beautiful. For the first time in years, the neighborhood actually felt like a community. But there were still some major problems. First, the local emergency services were overwhelmed. The town's main roads were still clogged, and first responders couldn't reach us. That meant we had to handle things ourselves. Second, some of the elderly residents were completely cut off. Their front doors were blocked by snow, and even though I had cleared the roads, they still couldn't get out. That's when I had an idea. I sent out another message. "I've got the tractor. If anyone knows of someone who's trapped in their house, let me know. I'll start clearing doorways and driveways." My phone exploded with responses. I started with Floyd, the elderly guy who had asked to warm up at my place the night before. His house was almost entirely buried. I had to use the tractor just to make a path to his front porch. When I finally cleared the last of the snow, he stepped out, bundled up in layers, shaking his head. "Son," he said, clapping me on the shoulder, "if I had a daughter, I'd make her marry you." I laughed. "Appreciate that, Floyd. You good to get to Brad's house for heat?" He nodded, already packed a bag. From there, I went house to house, plowing through snowbunks, freeing trapped families, and making paths for people to evacuate safely. One house had a pregnant woman who had been stuck inside for 2 days with no power. When I finally got to her front door, her husband nearly hugged me. "Dude, I was this close to breaking a window and climbing out," he said. Another house had a family with a newborn baby. They had been wrapping the baby in layers of blankets, but their house had dropped below freezing. I cleared their driveway and personally drove them to one of the warmed-up homes. Everywhere I went, people were offering help, sharing supplies, and looking out for one another. Even Trevor, the former HOA VP, tried to get involved. He came up to me, rubbing his hands together. "So, what can I do?" I smirked. "You got a shovel?" "Yeah." "Great," I said, gesturing to a Snowden house. "Start digging." To my surprise, he actually did it. Maybe even he had finally realized that Patricia's power-hungry nonsense wasn't worth it. By the end of the day, we had rescued over a dozen families, moved everyone into homes with heat, and gotten a few of the most vulnerable folks to a nearby shelter that had emergency power. Just when I thought we were done, another message popped up. "There's a family trapped in their house at the end of the cul-de-sac. They have no phone signal. Someone just saw them waving from the window." That part of the street had the worst snowdrift. Even the tractor struggled against the sheer weight of the ice and snow, but I pushed through. When I got to the house, sure enough, a woman and 2 kids were standing at the window, waving frantically. The father was trying to force the front door open, but it wouldn't budge. I jumped out of the tractor and started shoveling by hand. After a few minutes, the dad managed to shove the door open just enough to squeeze through. His eyes were wide with relief. "We thought we were stuck for days," he said. "I didn't know how much longer we could last." "You're not alone," I told him. "Let him get you out of here." I drove them to Brad's house, where a warm meal and a working heater were waiting. By the time the town finally got around to plowing our roads 2 days later, the crisis was already over. We had saved ourselves. The funny thing, this whole time, Patricia hadn't lifted a finger. She had spent the entire ordeal holed up in her house, only emerging once everything was already back to normal. When she finally did come outside, I was finishing up plowing the last bit of snow in front of my house. She walked up to me, her arms crossed. "I suppose you expect me to thank you," she said. I smiled. "No." Her lips pressed together. She looked around, realizing that her power over this neighborhood was officially gone. No one was listening to her anymore. I climbed onto my tractor, looking down at her. "But I do expect you to move out soon." She scowled. "You're insufferable." I revved the engine, "and you're unemployed." Then I rolled away, leaving her standing there in the snow. The neighborhood was stronger than ever. And as for me, well, I had a feeling that no one was ever going to question my tractor again. With the neighborhood roads cleared and the worst of the crisis over, things finally started returning to normal, well, almost normal. There was still the matter of the wreckage left in the storms with collapsed fences, damaged roofs, and frozen pipes. But there was one thing that had changed permanently. The HOA's grip on the community was broken. For years, Patricia and her little band of rule enforcers had bullied homeowners into submission. But now people had seen what true leadership looked like. And it wasn't the kind that came in the form of ridiculous fines and power-hungry control freaks. It was real neighbors helping each other. And Patricia, she was sinking. Ever since the recall vote that kicked her out of power, she had been desperately trying to claw her way back into relevance. But the truth was, no one cared what she had to say anymore. The final nail in her coffin was the petition to abolish several of the HOA's worst policies, including the ridiculous fines for things like trash can placement, the ban on personal lawn equipment, and the restrictions on holiday decorations. The meeting where those rules got overturned? Let's just say it was glorious. It was held in the same community clubhouse where Patricia had once ruled like a queen. But this time, instead of her usual smug confidence, she sat silently in the back, arms crossed, watching helplessly as everything she built crumbled before her eyes. I had taken a front row seat, enjoying the show. The new HOA president, Brad, who had been one of the first to support the effort to remove Patricia, stood at the podium. "All right, folks," he said, looking over the crowd. "We have a few major items to discuss tonight. First on the agenda, removing the fines for using personal equipment to maintain properties, including snowblowers, tractors, and lawnmowers." A thunderous cheer erupted from the crowd. Patricia, she looked like she was about to combust. The motion passed unanimously. Next item, Bill continued, abolishing excessive fines for minor infractions, including trash can placement and driveway decorations. Another round of applause. Trevor, the former HOA, who had been suspiciously quiet ever since Patricia's downfall, raised his hand. "I think we should still have some basic guidelines to maintain the neighborhood's aesthetic." Bill nodded. "That's fair, but it should be guidelines, not punishable offenses." The new policies passed with overwhelming support. And then came the final piece of poetic justice I had been waiting for all night. One of the older residents stood up, a woman named Mrs. Robertson, who had been in the neighborhood longer than anyone. She adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. "I have a proposal," she said. Bill gestured for her to continue. "I propose that Patricia officially steps down from the HOA board entirely and is barred from holding any future leadership roles." You could have heard a pin drop. Patricia's mouth fell open. "You can't do that," she sputtered.